안녕하세요. Today I'm going to be reading chapter 18. It's called Anne to the Rescue. All things great are wound up with all things little. At first glance, it might not seem that the decision of a certain Canadian premier to include Prince Edward Island in a political tour could have much or anything to do with the fortunes of little Anne Shirley at Green Gables. But it had. 네, 드라제이님, 안녕하세요. Alright. So 어떤 캐나다의 총독이 앤이 사는 프린스 에드워드 아일랜드에 오는 거가 앤 셔리의 운명하고 관련이 없다고 생각을 할 수가 있지만 네, 하지만 관련이 있었습니다. 어떻게 관련이 있는지 한번 들어보세요. 알리시아님 안녕하세요. 오늘 들어오셨네요. It was in January the premier came to address his loyal supporters and such of his non supporters as chose to be present at the monster mass meeting held in Charlottetown. Most of the Avonlea people were on the premier's side of politics. Hence, on the night of the meeting, nearly all the men and a goodly proportion of the women had gone to town 30 miles away. Mrs. Rachel Lynde had gone too. Mrs. Rachel Lynde was a red hot politician and couldn't have believed that the political rally could be carried through without her, although she was on the opposite side of politics. So she went to town and took her husband. Thomas would be useful in looking after the horse, and Marilla Cuthbert with her. Marilla had a sneaking interest in politics herself, and as she thought it might be her only chance to see a real live premiere, she promptly took it, leaving Anne and Matthew to keep house until her return the following day. Alright, 무슨 일이 있었나요? 어머, 서로 아시나 보다. Alright, so what happened was 총독이 이 작은 동네로 오는데 애븐리에서 30마일, 그러면 한 50km까지는 안 될 것 같아요. 그래서 그 총독의 정치와 비슷한 쪽에 있는 사람들은 들이 대부분이라서 다 갔어요. 하지만 누구만 그쪽이 아니었다고요? 미세스 레이첼 린드만 다른 쪽이에요. 정치에. 그러니깐 좌파가 있고 우파가 있듯이 그런 것처럼 네. 미세스 레이첼만 다른 쪽이었어요. 그래서 다른 사람들은 어떤 파인지 we will find out. 그래서 마릴라도 정치에 조금 관심이 있어서 따라갔어요. 앤하고 매튜만 놔두고. 그리고 언제 돌아온대요? 그다음 날. Hence, while Marilla and Mrs. Rachel were enjoying themselves hugely at the mass meeting, Anne and Matthew had the cheerful kitchen at Green Gables all to themselves. A bright fire was glowing in the old fashioned Waterloo stove, and blue white frost crystals were shining on the window panes. Matthew nodded over a farmer's advocate on the sofa, and Anne at the table studied her lessons with grim determination, despite sundry wistful glances at the clock shelf where lay a new book that Jane Andrews had lent her that day. Jane had assured her that it was warranted to produce any number of thrills or words to that effect, and Anne's fingers tingled to reach out for it. But that would mean Gilbert Blythe's triumph on the morrow. Anne turned her back on the clock shelf and tried to imagine it wasn't there. Alright, 무슨 일이 있나요? 일어나고 있나요? Matthew는 nodded over. Nodded over a farmer's advocate. 그러면 farmer's advocate가 여기 옆으로 이렇게 italics로 되어 있는 거 보이시죠? 그러면 이거는 magazine 혹은 책 이름일 수도 있는데 어라고 했기 때문에 어떤 잡지의 이름인 것 같습니다. 근데 nodded over. nod는 뭐예요? 이거죠. 끄덕이다. 그런데 nodded over 하는 거는 꾸벅꾸벅 졸았다는 거예요. Anne은 공부를 하고 있는데 Jane Andrews라는 친구가 너무 신나는 책을 빌려줬는데 그걸 읽고 싶지만 그거를 이 공부를 안 하고 그 책을 읽으면 그다음 날 Gilbert Blythe가 자기를 이길 거기 때문에 그렇게 할 수 없었다는 거죠. On the morrow 이거는 내일이라는 뜻입니다. 요즘에는 그렇게 말을 안 하죠. Matthew, did you ever study geometry when you went to school? Well, now, no, I didn't, said Matthew, coming out of his doze with a start. 네, coming out of his doze. 졸다가 말고 갑자기 깼어요. With a start. Startled, 깜짝 놀랬다인데 with a start 하면은 깜짝 놀랬다 뜻입니다. I wish you had, sighed Anne. 아, 공부했었더라면 좋았을 걸. 왜 좋았을 거라고 생각하세요? 처음에 이걸 읽었을 때는 '아 그러면은 나를 도와줄 수 있어서.' 이렇게 생각을 했는데 어떻게 말하는지 들어보세요. "Because then you'd be able to sympathize with me. You can't sympathize properly if you've never studied it. It is casting a cloud over my whole life. I'm such a dunce at it, Matthew." 네. sympathize 같이 위로해 줄 수 있다. 이해할 수 있다. 이런 뜻인데 공부 안 해 봤으면 이게 얼마나 고통스러운 건지 몰라서 슬프네요. 이 geometry가 내 인생의 먹구름이에요. 네. "Well now, I don't know," said Matthew soothingly. "I guess you're all right at anything. Mr. Phillips told me last week in Blair's store at Carmody that you was the smartest scholar in school and was making rapid progress. Rapid progress was his very words. There's them as runs down Teddy Phillips and says he ain't much of a teacher, but I guess he's all right." 네, 여기가 조금 알아듣기가 어려울 수 있어요. There's them as runs down Teddy Phillips. 그러니까 there are people란 뜻을 there's them이라고 했어요. There are people who run down, who talk badly about Teddy Phillips and say that he isn't a good teacher, but I guess he's all right. 네. 테리 필립스, 미스터 필립스가 정말 안 좋은 선생님이라고 어 말하는 사람들도 많지만 I guess he's all right. 괜찮은 것 같네. 왜 괜찮다고 했나요? 왜냐하면 he said that you was the smartest scholar in school and was making rapid progress. 네. 앤이 학교에서 제일 똑똑한 아이라고 해서 미스터 필립스 사람들이 욕하긴 하지만 내가 봤을 때 괜찮은 것 같아. 레이첼 님 안녕하세요. 어머, 어머. 네. 이승만 님 감사합니다. alright. I guess he's alright. 네. 그래서 Matthew의 이렇게 표현하는 걸 들어보면 뭘 알 수 있나요? 학교를 거의 많이 안 간 거를 알 수 있죠. 왜냐? Mr. Phillips told me that you were라고 안 하고 you was라고 했죠. 그러면 이건 틀린 문법이에요. So we can tell 네. 학교를 많이 안 갔어요. Alright. Matthew would have thought anyone who praised Anne was all right. "I'm sure I'd get on better with geometry if only he wouldn't change the letters," complained Anne. "I learned the proposition off by heart, and then he draws it on the blackboard and puts different letters from what are in the book, and I get all mixed up. I don't think a teacher should take such a mean advantage, do you? We're studying agriculture now, and I found out at last what makes the roads red. It's a great comfort. I wonder how Marilla and Mrs. Lynde are enjoying themselves. Mrs. Lynde says Canada is going to the dogs the way things are being run at Ottawa, and that it's an awful warning to the electors. She says if women were allowed to vote, we would soon see a blessed change. What way do you vote, Matthew?" "Conservative," said Matthew promptly. To vote conservative was part of Matthew's religion. 네, conservative는 liberal의 반대죠. 보수적으로 네, vote 한다는 거예요. 투표. 어머, 다들 서로 아시나 봐요. All right. Then I'm conservative too, said Anne decidedly. I'm glad because 맨날 Gil까지만 나와요. 이름을 차마 나가는 말할 수 없어 내 입으로 해서 because some of the boys in school are grits. I guess Mr. Phillips is a grit too, because Prissy Andrews' father is one, and Ruby Gillis says that when a man is courting, he always has to agree with the girl's mother in religion and her father in politics. Is that true, Matthew? 네. 그러면 I'm glad 나는 기뻐. 당신이 보수적이라서. 왜냐하면 학교에 있는 Gilbert랑 학교에 있는 다른 남자애들은 grits. 야. 그러니까 반대라는 거죠. Well, now, I don't know, said Matthew. Did you ever go courting, Matthew? 네, courting은 연애한 적 있냐? Well, now, no, I don't know as I ever did, said Matthew, who had certainly never thought of such a thing in his whole existence. Anne reflected with her chin in her hands. It must be rather interesting, don't you think, Matthew? Ruby Gillis says when she grows up, she's going to have ever so many bows on the string and have them all crazy about her. But I think that would be too exciting. I'd rather have just one in his right mind. But Ruby Gillis knows a great deal about such matters because she has so many big sisters, and Mrs. Lynde says the Gillis girls have gone off like hotcakes. 네, 여기까지 볼게요. So many beaus는 남자친구를 얘기를 하는 건데, Ruby Gillis는 어떻게 한대요? 어떻게 할 거래요? She's going to have so many bows on the string and have them all crazy about her. 자기를 좋아하는 남자들을 잔뜩 있어가지고 자기를 다 완전히 너무 좋아하는 사랑에 빠진 남자들이 있을 거라고. 그리고 루비 길스는 어떻게 이런 남자와 관련된 거를 많이 안다고요? 왜냐하면 언니들이 많아서. 그리고 Mrs. Lynde says the Gillis girls have gone off like hotcakes. 엄청 네, 잘 팔린다는 거죠. 네. Mr. Phillips goes up to see Prissy Andrews nearly every evening. He says it is to help her with her lessons, but Miranda Sloane is studying for Queen's too, and I should think she needed help a lot more than Prissy, because she's ever so much stupider, but he never goes to help her in the evenings at all. There are a great many things in this world that I can't understand very well, Matthew. Mr. Phillips는 Prissy Andrews를 공부를 도와주러 맨날 찾아간대요. 그런데 Miranda는 훨씬 더 바보라서 더 도움이 많이 필요한데 미란다는 왜 안 도와주는지 모르겠어요. 이 세상에서 내가 모르는 게 정말 많은 것 같아요. Well now, I don't know as I comprehend them all myself, acknowledged Matthew. Well, I suppose I must finish up my lessons. I won't allow myself to open that new book Jane lent me until I'm through. But it's a terrible temptation, Matthew. Even when I turn my back on it, I can see it there just as plain. Jane said she cried herself sick over it. I love a book that makes me cry, but I think I'll carry that book into the sitting room and lock it in the jam closet and give you the key. And you must not give it to me, Matthew, until my lessons are done, not even if I implore you on my bended knees. It's all very well to say resist temptation, but it's ever so much easier to resist it if you can't get the key. And then shall I run down the cellar and get some russets, Matthew? Wouldn't you like some russets? 네, 제인 앤드루스가 준 책이 너무 큰 유혹이라 가지고 자기가 공부해야 되는데 유혹이라서 이거를 어디다가 딱 잠가 놔야 되겠대요. Well, now, I don't know but what I would, said Matthew, who never ate russets, but knew Anne's weakness for them. 네, russets가 뭔지 우리 앞에 가면 알 수 있어요. 자기는 russet는 안 먹지만 Anne이 좋아한다는 거를. Anne's weakness for them. 그러면 그 russet에는 되게 약해진다. russet 앞에선 약해진다. 너무 좋아한다는 뜻이죠. I don't know but what I would. 은 좋아. 라는 뜻이죠. Just as Anne emerged triumphantly from the cellar with her plate full of russets, came the sound of flying footsteps on the icy boardwalk outside, and the next moment the kitchen door was flung open, and in rushed Diana Barry, white-faced and breathless, with a shawl wrapped hastily around her head. Anne promptly let go of her candle and plate in her surprise, and plate, candle, and apples crashed together down the cellar ladder and were found at the bottom embedded in melted grease the next day by Marilla, who gathered them up and thanked mercy the house hadn't been set on fire. 네, 그 다음 날 접시, 초 그리고 사과들이 밑에 cellar 지하에 떨어진 거를 찾았는데 '아 집안이 온 집안이 안 탄 게 다행이다.' 이렇게 생각을 했죠. 그래서 러세트가 뭐였나요? 사과요. "Whatever's the matter, Diana?" cried Anne. "Has your mother relented at last?" "Oh, Anne, do come quick!" implored Diana nervously. "Minnie May is awful sick. She's got croup, young Mary Joe says, and father and mother are away to town, and there's nobody to go for the doctor. Minnie May is awful bad, and young Mary Joe doesn't know what to do. And oh, Anne, I'm so scared." 네, 크루프는 제가 찾아봤어요. 급성 폐쇄성 후두염. 네. 그러니까 기침을 많이 하고 호흡 곤란이 생기는 병입니다. Matthew, without a word, reached out for cap and coat, slipped past Diana and away into the darkness of the yard. 바로 일어나서 나갔어요, Matthew는. "He's gone to harness the sorrel mare to go to the Carmody for the doctor," said Anne, who was hurrying on hood and jacket. 의사 부르러 갔어. "I know it as well as if he'd said so. 말한 것만큼 나는 확실해." Matthew and I are such kindred spirits I can read his thoughts without words at all. "I don't believe he'll find the doctor at Carmody," sobbed Diana. "I know that Dr. Blair went to town, and I guess Dr. Spencer would go too. Young Mary Joe never saw anybody with croup, and Mrs. Lynde is away. Oh, Anne!" 네, Young Mary Joe는 누군지 we're gonna find out. And Mrs. Lynde는 되게 애들을 많이 키웠잖아요. 그래서 이럴 때 어떻게 해야 되는지 아는 분인데 거기 그 총독을 보러 가서 "Don't cry, Di," said Anne cheerily. "I know exactly what to do for croup. You forget that Mrs. Hammond had twins 3 times. When you look after 3 pairs of twins, you naturally get a lot of experience. They all had croup regularly. Just wait till I get the Ipecac bottle. You mayn't have any at your house. Come on now." 네, 내가 이 폐쇄성 이 병, croup에는 내가 어떻게 해야 되는지 다 알아. 내 미세스 해먼 내가 있었던 그 집에 쌍둥이를 3번이나 낳았잖아. 그렇게 세상의 쌍둥이를 보면 아 3 개의 세상의 쌍둥이 맞나요? 보면 경험이 많이 쌓여. 걔네들은 엄청 맨날 이거 걸렸어. Ipecac bottle 이거는 무슨 약인가 보죠. The two little girls hastened out hand in hand and hurried through Lover's Lane and across the crusted field beyond, for the snow was too deep to go by the shorter wood way. Anne, although sincerely sorry for Minnie May, was far from being insensible to the romance of the situation and to the sweetness of once more sharing that romance with a kindred spirit. 미니 메이가 불쌍하긴 했지만, 네, 이렇게 자기 제일 좋아하는 친구랑 이렇게 가는 거가 정말 낭만적이었다는 거죠. All right. The night was clear and frosty, all ebony of shadow and silver of snowy slope. Big stars were shining over the silent fields. Here and there, the dark pointed firs stood up with snow powdering their branches and the wind whistling through them. Anne thought it was truly delightful to go skimming through all this mystery and loveliness with your bosom friend who had been so long estranged. Minnie May, aged 3, was really very sick. 3살이죠. 그러니까 만 3살. She lay on the kitchen sofa, feverish and restless, while her hoarse breathing could be heard all over the house. horse는 여기 스펠링이 우리 말할 때의 스펠링과 다르죠. horse breathing은 숨을 그냥 이렇게 쉬는 게 아니라 막 이게 막 걸거럽게? Is that how you say it? 이상하게 숨을 쉬는 거예요. 뭐가 이렇게 가래랑 이런 게 있어서. Young Mary Joe, a buxom, broad-faced French girl from the creek, whom Mrs. Barry had engaged to stay with the children during her absence, was helpless and bewildered, quite incapable of thinking what to do or doing it if she thought of it. Mrs. Barry가 다이아나 엄마가 메리 조를 와서 애들 보라고 했는데 너 이렇게 어떻게 해야 될지 몰라가지고 quite incapable 뭘 완전히 못한다는 거예요. 뭐를? thinking what to do. 뭘 해야 될지 생각. 그리고 or doing it if she thought it. 생각을 했더라도 그거를 행동으로 옮기는 걸. Anne went to work with skill and promptness. Minnie May has croup all right. She's pretty bad, but I've seen them worse. First, we must have lots of hot water. I declare, Diana, there isn't more than a cupful in the kettle. 뜨거운 물 있어야 돼. 그런데 지금 주전자에 한 컵밖에 없네. There, I filled it up. And Mary Jo, you may put some wood in the stove. I don't want to hurt your feelings. 상처 주긴 싫은데, but it seems to me you might have thought of this before you might have thought of this before if you'd any imagination. 상처 주긴 싫은데 이렇게 하는 거를 미리 생각했으면은 상상력이 있었더라면 이거 생각 좀 했었더라면 이런 거 미리 했어야지. Now I'll undress Minnie May and put her to bed, and you try to find some soft flannel cloths, Diana. I'm going to give her a dose of Ipecac first of all. All right, everybody, are you enjoying it? Enjoying the story so far? 질문 있으시면 알려주세요. Minnie May did not take kindly to the Ipecac, but Anne had not brought up 3 pairs of twins for nothing. That did not take kindly. 잘 받아들이지 않았다. 그러니까 이거 약을 주니까 어떻게 했다는 거야? 꿀떡꿀떡. 잘 마시는 게 아니라 엄청 막 뱉고 막 난리를 쳤다는 거죠. 그런데 Anne은 괜히 쌍둥이 셋이나 괜히 키운 게 아니었어요. Down that Ipecac went not only once, but many times during the long, anxious night when the 2 little girls worked patiently over the suffering Minnie May, and young Mary Jo, honestly anxious to do all she could, kept on a roaring fire and heated more water than would have been needed for a hospital of croupy babies. Honestly anxious. 네, 정말로 잘하고 싶어요. 자기 돕고 싶은데 뭘 할지 모르니까 계속 불을 피우고 물을 엄청 많이 데웠다는 거예요. It was 3 o'clock when Matthew came with the doctor, for he had been obliged to go all the way to Spencervale for one. But the pressing need for assistance was past. Minnie May was much better and was sleeping soundly. 네, 언제 다시 왔나요? 마thew가 의사 모시고 3시. 그럼 이게 오후일까요? 새벽일까요? Let's find out. I was awfully near giving up in despair, explained Anne. She got worse and worse until she was sicker than ever the Hammond twins were, even the last pair. I actually thought she was going to choke to death. I gave her every drop of Ipecac in that bottle, and when the last dose went down, I said to myself, not to Diana or young Mary Jo, because I didn't want to worry them any more than they were worried, but I had to say it to myself just to relieve my feelings. This is the last lingering hope, and I fear 'tis a vain one. But in about 3 minutes she coughed up the phlegm and began to get better right away. You must just imagine my relief, doctor, because I can't express it in words. You know there are some things that cannot be expressed in words. 자기가 돌봤던 애들보다 제일 심했던 쌍둥이들보다 더 심해서 정말 이제 약 다 주고 나서 이제 이게 마지막 희망인데 안 될 것 같아. 안 될까 봐 너무 걱정이다. 그랬는데 그 얘기는 다이애나하고 메리 조한테는 안 했다는 거예요, 걱정시키기 싫어서. 그런데 그 마지막 약을 줬더니 3분 후에 phlegm 가래를 다 뱉어내서 갑자기 되게 좋아졌다는 거예요. You can't you I 다시요. Sorry. You must just imagine my relief, doctor, because I can't express it in words. 내가 얼마나 다행이라고 생각했는지 상상하셔야 돼요. 왜냐면 내가 말로는 표현을 못 하겠어요. 어떤 것들은 도저히 말로 표현이 안 됩니다. Yes, I know, nodded the doctor. He looked at Anne as if he were thinking some things about her that couldn't be expressed in words. Later on, however, he expressed them to Mr. and Mrs. Barry. That little red-headed girl they have over at Cuthbert's is as smart as they make 'em. I tell you, she saved that baby's life, for it would have been too late by the time I got here. She seems to have a skill and presence of mind perfectly wonderful in a child of her age. I never saw anything like the eyes of her when she was explaining the case out to me. The presence of mind, 침착성. 되게 막 "아 어떻게 해야 돼." 이런 게 아니라 되게 침착했다는 거죠. Anne had gone home in the wonderful white frosted winter morning, heavy-eyed from loss of sleep, but still talking unweariedly to Matthew as they crossed the long white field and walked under the glittering fairy arch of the Lovers' Lane maples. White frosted winter morning이에요. It's morning now. Oh, Matthew, isn't it a wonderful morning? The world looks like something God had just imagined for his own pleasure, doesn't it? Those trees look as if I could blow them away with a breath. Poof! I'm so glad I live in a world where there are white frosts, aren't you? And I'm so glad Mrs. Hammond had three pairs of twins after all. Mrs. Hammond가 쌍둥이를 세 번이나 낳은 게 정말 기쁜 것 같아요. 그렇게 하지 않았더라면 내가 미니 메이를 어떻게 도와야 될지 몰랐을 뻔했어요. If she hadn't, I might have known what to do for Minnie May. I'm real sorry I was ever cross with Mrs. Hammond for having twins. 내가 미세스 해머니가 쌍둥이를 그렇게 많이 낳았을 때 화낸 게 정말 미안하네요. But oh, Matthew, I'm so sleepy. I can't go to school. I just know I couldn't keep my eyes open and I'd be so stupid. But I hate to stay home for guilt. Some of the others will get ahead of the class, and it's so hard to get up again. Although, of course, the harder it is, the more satisfaction you have when you do get up, haven't you? 네, 우리 아까 3 시에 왔다 그랬는데 인제 답이 나왔죠. 새벽 3 시에 왔던 거예요. 그래서 이제 아침이 되니깐 집에 돌아오는 거고요. "Well, now, I guess you'll manage all right," said Matthew, looking at Anne's white little face and the dark shadows under her eyes. 다크서클. "You just go right to bed and have a good sleep. I'll do all the chores." Anne accordingly went to bed and slept so long and soundly that it was well on in the white and rosy winter afternoon when she awoke and descended to the kitchen where Marilla, who had arrived home in the meantime was sitting knitting. "Oh, did you see the premiere?" exclaimed Anne at once. "What did he look like, Marilla?" "Well, he never got to be premier on account of his looks," said Marilla. "Such a nose as that man had. But he can speak. I was proud of being a conservative. Rachel Lynde, of course, being a liberal, had no use for him. Your dinner's in the oven, Anne, and you can get yourself some blue plum preserve out of the pantry. I guess you're hungry. Matthew has been telling me about last night. I must say it was fortunate you knew what to do. I wouldn't have had I wouldn't have had any idea myself, for I never saw a case of croup. There now, never mind talking till you've had your dinner. I can tell by the look of you that you're just full up with speeches, but they'll keep. All right. 네. He never got to be premier on account of his looks. 무슨 뜻일까요? 아, 외모 때문에 프리미어를 한 거는 아니다. Okay. Alright. 그다음에 네. 승마님 제가 네. 너무 많이 쓰셔 가지고 제가 나중에 읽어 볼게요. Alright. 내가 딱 너를 봐도 엄청 말을 많이 하고 싶은 것 같은데 but they'll keep 무슨 뜻일까요? 아, 그 말할 것들이 어디 안 가니깐 일단 밥이나 먹어. Marilla had something to tell Anne, but she did not tell it just then, for she knew if she did, Anne's consequent excitement would lift her clear out of the region of such material matters as appetite or dinner. Not until Anne had finished her saucer of blue plums did Marilla say, 네, 밥 먹을 때까지 자기가 할 얘기가 있었는데 아직 안 얘기하고 이제 끝나니까 말했어요. Let's see what she has to say. Mrs. Barry was here this afternoon, Anne. She wanted to see you, but I wouldn't wake you up. She says you saved Minnie May's life, and she is very sorry she acted as she did in that affair of the currant wine. She says she knows now you didn't mean to set Diana drunk, and she hopes you'll forgive her and be good friends with Diana again. You're to go over this evening if you like, for Diana can't stir outside the door on account of a bad cold she caught last night. Now, Anne Shirley, for pity's sake, don't fly clean up into the air. 어, 미세스 베리가 와서 네가 미니메이 생명을 구했다고. 그리고 그 전에 그 술 취한 거 그 일은 자기가 미안하다고. 이제 알겠다고 다이아나를 일부러 술 취하게 한 게 아니라는 걸. 그래서 용서해 줬으면 좋겠고 그리고 다이아나랑 다시 친하게 지냈으면 좋겠다. The warning seemed not unnecessary, so uplifted and aerial was Anne's expression and attitude as she sprang to her feet, her face irradiated with the flame of her spirit. Oh, Marilla, can I go right now without washing my dishes? I'll wash them when I come back, but I cannot tie myself down to anything so unromantic as dishwashing at this thrilling moment. 설거지 갔다 와서 해도 될까요? 이렇게 신나는 순간에 어, 낭만적이지 못한 설거지 같은 것은 내가 지금은 할 수가 없네요. Yes, yes, run along, said Marilla indulgently. Anne Shirley, are you crazy? Come back this instant and put something on. I might as well call to the wind. She's gone without a cap or wrap. 네. Are you crazy? 왜 그랬나요? 아, 스카프나 숄 혹은 모자도 안 쓰고 그냥 막 뛰어갔어요. Look at her tearing through the orchard with her hair streaming. It'll be a mercy if she doesn't catch her death of cold. Anne came dancing home in the purple winter twilight across the snowy places. Afar in the southwest was the great shimmering, pearl-like sparkle of an evening star in a sky that was pale golden and ethereal rose over gleaming white spaces and dark glens of spruce. The tinkles of sleigh bells among the snowy hills came like elfin chimes through the frosty air, but their music was not sweeter than the song in Anne's heart and on her lips. You see before you a perfectly happy person, Marilla, she announced. I'm perfectly happy. Yes, in spite of my red hair. 어, 나는 완벽하게 행복해요. 이 빨간 머리가 있음에도 불구하고. Just at present, I have a soul above red hair. Mrs. Barry kissed me and cried and said she was so sorry and she could never repay me. I felt fearfully embarrassed, Marilla, but I just said as politely as I could. 너무 미안하다고 미세스 베리가 얘기를 했는데 자기는 되게 공손하게 되게 나이스 친절하게 I have no hard feelings for you, Mrs. Barry. 나쁜 감정 없다고. I assure you once for all. 마지막으로 얘기를 하겠는데 나는 다이아나를 일부러 술 취하게 한 게 아니고 and henceforth, 여기 이거죠. I assure you once for all that I did not mean to intoxicate Diana, and henceforth I shall cover the past with the mantle of oblivion. mantle는 뭔가요? 네, 뜻이 많은데 여기서는 덮개라는 건데, oblivion은 흔적도 없이 사라진 짐. 이게 근데 명사예요. 그래서 내가 과거를 흔적도 없이 사라지는 지게끔 표면으로 덮겠다. 과거를 흔적도 없게 사라지게 하는 덮개로 씌우겠다. 이런 뜻입니다. That was a pretty dignified way of speaking, wasn't it, Marilla? I felt that I was heaping coals of fire on Mrs. Barry's head. 네, 그때 우리 heaping coals of fire 배웠었죠. coal는 석탄인가요? 은혜를 갚아 뉘우치게 하다라는 뜻이죠. And Diana and I had a lovely afternoon. Diana showed me a new fancy crochet stitch her aunt over at Carmody taught her. Not a soul in Avonlea knows it but us, and we pledged a solemn vow never to reveal it to anyone else. Diana gave me a beautiful card with a wreath of roses on it and a verse of poetry. If you love me as I love you, nothing but death can part us two. 네, 너무 귀여워요. 근데 저 같았으면은 그렇게 미안하다고 미세스 베리가 했으면 아닙니다. 괜찮아요. 아니에요." 이랬을 텐데 이제부터 없는 걸로 하겠습니다. 과거를 흔적도 없게 사라지게 하는 덮개로 씌우겠습니다. 얼마나 웃겨요. And that is true, Marilla. We're going to ask Mr. Phillips to let us sit together in school again, and Gertie Pye can go with Minnie Andrews. We had an elegant tea. Mrs. Barry had the very best china set out, Marilla, just as if I was real company. Best china set. 제일 좋은 접시 세트 썼대요. 자기가 정말 진짜 손님인 것처럼. I can't tell you what a thrill it gave me. Nobody ever used their very best china on my account before. And we had fruit cake and pound cake and donuts and 2 kinds of preserves, Marilla. And Mrs. Barry asked me if I took tea and said, Pa, why don't you pass the biscuits to Anne? It must be lovely to be grown up, Marilla, when just being treated as if you were is so nice. 아, 어른인 거 너무 좋을 것 같아요. 어른 대접받는 것만으로도 이렇게 좋은데. I don't know about that, said Marilla with a brief sigh. Well, anyway, when I am grown up, said Anne decidedly, I'm always going to talk to little girls as if they were too, and I'll never laugh when they use big words. I know from sorrowful experience how that hurts one's feelings. After tea, Diana and I made taffy. The taffy wasn't very good, I suppose because neither Diana nor I had ever made any before. 네, taffy는 한국말로 찾아봤더니 태피라고 써 있어요. 설탕을 녹여 만든 무른 사탕이래요. 우리 한국 버전은 달고나죠. 대신 그냥 설탕을 녹이는 게 아니라 소다를 넣었죠. Diana left me to stir it while she buttered the plates, and I forgot and let it burn. And then when we set it out on the platform to cool, the cat walked over one plate and that had to be thrown away. But the making of it was splendid fun. Then when I came home, Mrs. Barry asked me to come over as often as I could, and Diana stood at the window and threw kisses to me all the way down to Lover's Lane. I assure you, Marilla, that I feel like praying tonight, and I'm going to think out a special brand new prayer in honor of the occasion. 네, 아무 때나 오라고, 올 수 있는 만큼 오라고. Mrs. Barry가 이제 완전히 180도 바뀌었죠. 네, alright. 네, 이제 마음이 조금 가벼워졌죠. 다이아나랑 앤이 화해해서. Alright, everybody. 오늘은 chapter 18 끝이고요. Chapter 19는 꽤 기네요. So next week we're going to do chapter 19. 네, 미리 예습해서 질문들을 가지고 오시면 더 도움이 되실 수도 있지만 네, 그냥 오셔도 됩니다. Alright, thank you for coming everybody. Good night.